The Curse of the Exorcist. When Hell Followed Them Home. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. Some films are made to frighten, but what happens when the terror doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling? In 1973, Hollywood created what many consider the most disturbing film of all time, a work that forever changed the history of cinema, a production that crossed boundaries that perhaps should never have been crossed. What no one expected was that the true curse was only beginning. Prepare yourself to discover the unsettling truth behind the curtains of one of the most controversial productions in cinema history. William Friedkin, visionary director who won an Oscar for The French Connection, was about to make history again with The Exorcist, a film based on William Peter Blatty's bestseller that would explore the boundaries between faith, fear, and the supernatural. But while the cameras captured the fictional story, something inexplicable began to happen behind the scenes. A film set mysteriously consumed by flames in the dead of night. 9 people connected to the production who never saw daylight again. Unexplained injuries, strange coincidences, and reports of phenomena that 5 decades later still defy any rational explanation. As if by portraying evil, they had inadvertently attracted something into our world. The Exorcist wasn't just another film to entertain audiences. Friedkin had a vision to create the most authentic and disturbing experience ever seen in cinema. To achieve this, he employed methods that today would be considered extreme and even unethical. He fired guns loaded with blank ammunition on set, without warning the actors. "I want genuine reactions," he would tell the technical crew. "I want real astonishment in their eyes." He kept the set refrigerated at extremely low temperatures. He threw ice-cold water on the actors to capture authentic shivers and discomfort. And for the final sacrament scene, he would accept nothing less than a real Jesuit priest. "Authenticity is essential," Friedkin insisted. "The audience needs to feel that what they're seeing is real." But perhaps he went too far in his quest for realism. Crew members began to report strange sensations on set. "It was as if someone was always watching," reported a camera assistant years later. Equipment that worked perfectly during tests would inexplicably fail when the possession scenes began. Even before the premiere, unsettling rumors circulated through the studio corridors. The word curse was whispered among the technicians. And then, it happened. On a cold winter night, without any warning, without any witness, flames appeared from nowhere and consumed the main McNeil house set. Firefighters worked for hours to control the blaze. When they finally managed to enter the ruins, they found something that defied any explanation. The fire had completely destroyed the entire set, with a single disturbing exception. Regan's bedroom, the epicenter of the possession scenes, remained intact. Not a smoke mark, not a sign of damage. As if some invisible force had protected it. As if something wanted those scenes to continue being filmed. Nobody could explain. Dury recalled a firefighter years later. "In 30 years of service, I never saw anything like it. It was as if the fire had avoided that room. Production was delayed for weeks. The set was rebuilt. But the feeling that something was terribly wrong only grew. And then began the sequence of events that would transform The Exorcist into something more than just a movie. Jack McGowran, the talented Irish actor who gave life to Burke Dennings, the film director in the movie, finished his scenes on a Friday. By Sunday, he was hospitalized. By Monday, he was no longer among us. Officially, complications related to influenza. Disturbing coincidence. His character in the film meets a tragic end by falling from a window. Vasiliki Maliaros, a Greek lady with no previous acting experience, was personally chosen by Friedkin to play Father Karras's mother. In the script, her character dies during the narrative. In real life, Maliaros also didn't live to see the film on the big screen. She passed away shortly after completing her scenes, and the coincidences only multiplied. Paul Bateson, a radiology technician who appears in a small scene in the film, years later would be convicted of homicide. Max von Sydow, the renowned actor who played Father Merrin, received the devastating news of his brother's death on the first day he stepped onto the set. A camera assistant suffered a serious car accident right after filming a particularly intense scene. A lighting technician lost control of his vehicle and collided fatally on his way to the set. In total, 9 people connected to the production lost their lives in circumstances that, individually, could be explained, but collectively formed a disturbing pattern. "Statistics don't lie," commented a crew member years later. "The probability of so many deaths associated with a single production is practically non-existent." And the most unsettling part, the tragedy didn't stop when the cameras stopped rolling. The trail of inexplicable events would continue for years. While deaths occurred off the set, inside it something equally disturbing was happening. Linda Blair, a young actress of just 14 years old, faced the most challenging role that Hollywood had ever assigned to someone so young. The scenes required extreme physical contortions. The famous 360-degree headspin was performed with a dummy, but other sequences, these required Linda herself to execute movements that exceeded the natural limits of the human body. "I felt something break," she reported years later. "A snap that reverberated through my spine. The medical diagnosis, a fracture in her lumbar spine, an injury that would accompany her for the rest of her life." But young Linda wasn't the only one to carry physical marks from the set. Ellen Burstyn, who played Chris McNeil, the desperate mother, went through an experience that crossed the line between acting and reality in a terrifying way. In a sequence where her character is thrown by supernatural force, Friedkin instructed the technicians to pull the cable attached to the actress with more force than normal. "He said he needed something more impactful," recalled an assistant. "Something more visceral." The result, Ellen was pulled with such violence that her spine suffered a permanent injury. That scream you hear in the film, that expression of absolute pain that appears on screen, it's not acting. It's the exact moment when her spine was damaged. Real pain captured forever on film. "I felt as if something had ruptured inside me," Ellen described afterward. And it had. Max von Sydow, despite playing the elderly Father Merrin, was only 44 years old at the time of filming. The characterization to age him took hours daily. The process was so exhausting, the atmosphere on set so oppressive, that he frequently fainted from exhaustion after scenes. A production assistant revealed years later, Von Sydow would shake uncontrollably after the exorcism scenes. It wasn't acting. Something in that room deeply affected him. And the inexplicable incidents weren't limited to the studio walls. A plane transporting equipment to the set was struck by lightning on a clear day. There wasn't a single cloud, the pilot testified. The lightning came out of nowhere. Another plane carrying crew members suffered a catastrophic failure in all electrical systems simultaneously. A malfunction that aeronautical experts could never explain. A truck transporting original film reels inexplicably overturned on a perfectly straight road. It was as if every aspect of the production was cursed, commented a technician years later. As if something didn't want that film to reach the public. And then began the reports that no rational explanation could justify. Jason Miller, the actor who played the tormented Father Karras, was walking through New York a week after finishing his most intense scenes. "It was an ordinary day," he reported in a rare interview years later. "I was just walking thinking about my next project. That's when a man he had never seen before approached him. A stranger of common appearance, who could have been anyone. The crowd. The man looked directly into Miller's eyes and said just one sentence. 'If you believe in God, then you must also believe in the devil.' Before Miller could react or respond, the man had disappeared among the passers-by. It was as if he had never been there," Miller recalled, visibly disturbed even decades later. In the studio, the reports accumulated. A sound technician, recording in his isolated booth, removed his headphones, startled. "There's someone whispering." "On the set," he told the assistant director. When they checked the cameras, the set was completely empty. A makeup artist refused to remain alone in the trailer, after hearing her name being called repeatedly when there was no one around. Lighting equipment that had been checked minutes before inexplicably exploded during the possession scenes. "We tested everything exhaustively," recalled the chief electrician. "It was technically impossible for them to fail that way." Doors that closed by themselves. Objects that changed places without explanation. Temperatures that dropped drastically in specific rooms, even at the height of summer. "The entire studio seemed watched," reported an assistant, "as if something was always there outside our field of vision." The environment became so oppressive that Warner Brothers made an unprecedented decision. Thomas Birmingham, a Jesuit priest who initially had been hired only as a technical consultant for theological issues, was called for something more. "They didn't directly ask me to exorcise the set," Birmingham revealed years later. "But they asked me if I could bless the facilities repeatedly." The priest performed purification rituals between the filming of the most intense scenes, a fact that the studio kept in absolute secrecy for decades. And when the film finally reached theaters, the phenomenon exceeded the studio walls. The Exorcist wasn't just another horror film. It became a cultural event, and also a catalyst for inexplicable occurrences. In 1974, in a theater in Rome, several people in the audience began to manifest erratic behaviors simultaneously. Doctors present couldn't explain the collective phenomenon. In Boston, a young woman fainted during the head-spinning scene and, upon waking, didn't recognize her own family members for hours. In Los Angeles, an entire session was evacuated when 4 different people began having seizures at the same time during the crucifix scene. In a case that became notorious, a 40-year-old man with no history of heart problems suffered a fatal attack during a screening in New York. The family sued Warner Brothers, claiming that the film literally scared him to death. Psychologists tried to explain the phenomenon as collective hysteria. Doctors suggested that extreme tension could, in fact, trigger severe physiological reactions in predisposed people. But for many who experienced those events, the explanation seemed insufficient. It was as if the film had opened a door, commented a theater manager of the time. A door that perhaps should remain closed. 5 decades have passed since The Exorcist reached the big screen. A work that transcended the status of simple entertainment to become a cultural phenomenon. A film that continues to fascinate and disturb new generations. But the question remains, were they just tragic coincidences or consequences of crossing boundaries that should remain inviolate? William Friedkin, the visionary director known for his skepticism and rational approach, rarely granted interviews about the inexplicable events that surrounded his masterpiece. In one of the few times he addressed the topic, in 2007, he said, "Something revealing. I don't believe in coincidences," he admitted, visibly uncomfortable. "I never have, but I also can't explain what happened on that set. Some things defy any rational explanation." William Peter Blatty, the author of the original novel and screenwriter of the film, had a different view. Deeply religious, he saw the events as a warning. Some themes, he declared in his last interview before passing away, shouldn't be approached without extreme respect. There are boundaries in human knowledge that exist for a reason. Linda Blair, the young actress whose face became forever associated with supernatural terror, carried the weight of that role throughout her life. In 2018, she made a surprising confession. "I never could sleep alone in a house again after that. Production, never." When pressed about why, her response was disturbing. "There are things that happened on that set that I can't explain, and honestly, I prefer not to try." Psychologist Dr. Richard Thompson, a specialist in collective trauma, offers an explanation. Working with extremely disturbing material can create a kind of shared trauma. The human mind seeks patterns and meanings, especially in tragic events. "It's possible," he continues, "that the emotional intensity of that production created an atmosphere where normal coincidences came to be interpreted as something supernatural. A rational explanation, no doubt. But is it sufficient? How to explain that 9 people linked to a single production died in unusual circumstances? How to justify that a fire destroyed the entire set, except exactly the room where the possession scenes were filmed? How to understand the countless reports of inexplicable phenomena from people who had nothing to gain by sharing them? Hollywood tried to forget. The industry preferred to classify everything as extraordinary coincidences. Records were archived, witnesses discouraged from speaking, but 5 decades later, The Exorcist continues to be the only horror film with so many inexplicable reports and disturbing coincidences. And perhaps this explains why, even today, it is still considered by many critics and fans as the scariest film of all time, not just for what it shows on screen, but for what it may have triggered beyond it. In his memoir published shortly before his death, Blatty wrote something revealing. "I believe some stories have power. They aren't just words on a page or images on a screen. They touch something deep in our collective consciousness, and sometimes, by giving form to certain fears, we also give them a door to enter." If you've followed this story to this point, Perhaps now you understand why some films transcend the simple classification of entertainment. Works like The Exorcist seem to exist at an unsettling threshold between the world of fiction and something more disturbing. Is it just our collective imagination seeking patterns where none exist? Or is there something deeper that connects these inexplicable tragedies? The paradox of The Exorcist is that, in trying to portray evil so authentically, Friedkin may have inadvertently opened a door that, as many believe, was never completely closed. 50 years later, members of the original production still refused to discuss certain aspects of the filming. Files supposedly got lost. Witnesses fell silent. Warner Brothers never officially commented on the allegations of supernatural events. The industry preferred silence, but the stories persist. Before you leave, check twice if you're really alone at this moment. Notice the dark corners of the place where you are. Feel the air around you. Not all stories are just stories. Some remain alive, decades later, waiting for new ears willing to listen to them. Subscribe to the channel to explore more obscure secrets of cinema history. Hit the bell to be the first to receive our next investigations into the unknown. Share with those who have the courage to face the inexplicable. And remember, the true terror isn't in the stories we tell, but in the doors they may open. There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.